Aquinas famously has 5 proofs for the existence of God, 5 ways that the things of our world testify to the nature and reality of their own supernatural and superhuman source. Aquinas says there are 5 ways we can do this, and each of the 5 ways starts from a familiar, recognizable aspect of our experience. And in fact, the 5 ways in a way are one way. Like the more you dig into the first way, you see that the other ways are already kind of in there. So it's like a progressively deeper explication of the way that our familiar experience points to something. So he says the first way is from motion. So whenever there is motion, something is being moved, right? Something is on its way somewhere, and it doesn't have that yet. And so Aquinas says, just by seeing the fact of motion, you can recognize, oh, motion has to come from something. It's about something, and it's explained by something that exceeds it. Any individual motion is like that. But that means all motion is like that, and therefore motion as such is going to have to be explained by something else. So the very fact of motion should be seen as a kind of prompt in a way for you to say, wait, why is there motion? And the answer is, motion can't be explained by the fact of motion. It's got to be explained by a mover that isn't itself moving. There has to be an existent character to reality such that just resting in its eternal, unchanging form, it gives rise to motion. That's what Aquinas calls the first way. The second way, and Aquinas, wants to move in each case from something, the most familiar thing he can to this ultimate source, but he's going to go through things that are less and less sort of immediately apparent. Motion, most immediately apparent thing about our perceptual life. But what's above that? Well, the second thing he says is, things also actually exist. So we started off talking about a kind of potential, the reality of a kind of potential, something that's on its way somewhere. But things also exist. I exist. A dog exists. That upright vase exists. Anything that exists can't explain the fact of its own existence. The fact that it exists means something has to have brought it into being. So again, as with the motion, when we think about the existing things as a whole, existing things have to be explained by something. And to the extent that all of those things are things that don't explain themselves, there has to have been something that is responsible for their being existing. The third way kind of continues on that a little bit more deeply. So we've gone from the potential to the actual. Now we're going to go to the necessary and the contingent. The whole world of things that we encounter are contingent existences that do not have within themselves the capacity to explain why there would be existing at all. And so the fact that there is existence has to be explained by something, and it has to be explained by something that does not itself have that character of having to have its existence explained. So there must be something, the very nature of which is to exist. So in each case, we've gone from movement to talking about an existing thing to talking about the contingency of all existence. In each case, these things point to that which must account for them, that which is their source. And the point is, the very nature of its being a source is that it can't have the character of that which needs to be explained by it. Right? So it can't be moving. It can't be an individual that was brought into being by something else. It can't be something that could not exist. So those first 2 ways are, in a way, trying to point to the kind of fact of something, the kind of fact that you should be able to see from the first and the second way that there's something that needs to be explained here. And so those first 2 kind of just say source. Third way starts to really bring out something about the character of that source. Pretty powerful, in fact, and that is that it's something the very nature of which has to be to exist. If there weren't something the very nature of which is to exist, there wouldn't be any existing. The fourth way continues along that path of deepening our sense of what it is that we're talking about there. And so he says here, when you look around at anything, you see things characterized by more or less. Some things are more or less good, more or less beautiful. Certain acts are more or less just. But you can only make those recognitions that this is just or this is good to a certain extent because there is, again, a kind of reality, what it is to be just, what it is to be good. And it has to be that in a kind of absolute sense, not a good thing that's this much or that much good, but there has to be goodness as such if it's possible for this to be good to a certain extent. There has to be beauty as such. Beauty as such has to be a characteristic of reality for this to be beautiful to a certain extent. And so that's the fourth thing then, that there has to be a source of our world that is good, beautiful, just as such to explain how there can be things that are good to a certain extent, beautiful to a certain extent. And the fifth way, Aquinas says, in all of this, really in a way the notion of good is going to come out particularly strongly here. And also that notion of movement from the first way is going to come out. In all things, you see what they're really doing is, in a way, striving to realize a certain kind of animating goal that they have. So tomato seed is trying to become a full-grown tomato plant. Baby horse is trying to become a full-grown horse. And in all its actions, it tries to do the things horses are supposed to do. So again, the world testifies to the fact that there is a kind of sense to the way things act. But the very nature of all those things is that they can't explain how there could be such a thing, right? So we've gone through creation from movement up to the sort of pursuit of the good. And the point is, these are all aspects of reality you can see that are what have to be explained. And none of the things in reality can explain that thing about themselves. And so these are the ways that the things of creation, the things made, the things that we see, make clearly manifest the invisible power that must explain them. Right? It's not something you can pick out visually, it's something you have to understand. So Paul calls these things noumena, right? Things that have to be understood. But they're understood through things seen. And as Paul says, you have no excuse for not seeing them. And it's just a matter of being honest about what you see. And what you see is that it's the very character of everything around you, that it kind of lives on the basis of a debt. It lives on the basis of dimensions of reality that it itself cannot account for. And that's true of everything as an individual. That especially came out in the second way when we were talking about things that have to be brought into existence. But it's also true about nature as a whole. Right? That's kind of the third way, talking about the whole that is, that didn't have to be. And I said nature, but I also could have said people, right? These things aren't also going to be explained by people's doing things, right? The thing that is the source of all this isn't itself a thing caused by nature. It's what's got to explain nature. It's also not a thing caused by our choice. It's what's got to explain this. And so in that sense, it's got to be something both supernatural to explain nature and superhuman to explain the human. So those are the 5 ways that Aquinas says the things of our world testify to the reality and the nature of their own supernatural and superhuman source.